My name is Alina Mercer, and 5 years ago my mother slammed the front door so hard the picture frames shook off the hallway wall. My younger brother, Caleb, stood in the driveway holding a duffel bag in one hand and a tiny pink baby blanket in the other while rain soaked through his hoodie. My father pointed at him like he was a stranger and said 7 words that split our family in half forever. "If that child is yours, don't come back." Caleb was only 24 years old. His girlfriend had died in a car accident 3 weeks earlier, and the newborn baby she left behind was sleeping in a hospital nursery with nobody except Caleb willing to claim her. My parents called the baby a burden, a scandal, a mistake tied to tragedy. But I looked at my brother standing there in the storm, destroyed and shaking, and I realized something terrifying. Grief had not broken my parents. It had revealed them. I took Caleb home with me that same night. I was 33, divorced, working night shifts at a rehabilitation center, barely paying my mortgage, and suddenly I became a second parent to a grieving man and a newborn little girl named Ivy. For the next 4 years, my life became a blur of midnight feedings, overdue bills, and exhaustion so deep it settled into my bones. Caleb barely slept during those first months. Sometimes I would wake up at 3:00 in the morning and find him sitting beside Ivy's crib crying silently because she had his girlfriend's eyes. Other nights he would stand in the kitchen holding a bottle with one hand and old voicemails with the other. He blamed himself for surviving the accident that killed Amelia. My parents never called. Not after the funeral. Not after the baby came home. Not even on Christmas. To the outside world, they pretended their son no longer existed. But the real story, the one that destroyed every lie they built their reputation on, began the afternoon Ivy turned 4 years old. Because that was the day my parents discovered the truth about Amelia's family, the inheritance nobody knew existed, and the powerful people who had secretly been watching how Caleb was treated ever since he was thrown out. My parents cared about appearances more than love. My mother, Diane Mercer, treated reputation like religion. My father was a city councilman in our town for almost 20 years, the kind of man who shook hands at charity events and gave speeches about family values, while ignoring his own son's panic attacks. Our family attended every fundraiser, every church luncheon, every holiday parade. We looked perfect in photographs. That mattered more to my parents than reality ever did. Caleb had always been the emotional one, creative, soft-hearted. He played guitar at coffee shops and volunteered at animal shelters instead of chasing money. My parents hated that about him. Amelia was even worse in their eyes. She was an art student from the wrong side of town with tattoos, loud laughter, and a habit of saying exactly what she thought. My mother once described her as the kind of girl who ruins futures. What nobody knew was that Amelia came from money. Real money, old money. Her estranged grandfather owned one of the largest vineyard estates in Northern California. Amelia never talked about it because she hated him, said he controlled everyone around him with checks and contracts. She walked away from that world years before she met Caleb. My parents assumed she was poor because she worked at a diner and drove a rusted Honda Civic. They judged her without ever asking a single question. Then Amelia died, and everything became uglier. At the funeral, my father pulled Caleb aside near the cemetery gates and told him, "You are throwing your life away for a dead girl's child." Caleb punched the stone wall so hard he fractured 2 fingers. That night my parents threw him out. For 2 years, Caleb raised Ivy with me. I picked up extra shifts, sold my jewelry, canceled vacations I never really took anyway. We survived by stretching every dollar until it screamed. Caleb started repairing guitars in our garage for cash. Ivy grew into a bright, stubborn little girl who followed him everywhere. She called him Daddy Bear because of his beard. Sometimes I would watch them dancing in the kitchen to old records and think this was what real family looked like. Not church photos, not polished smiles, just people refusing to abandon each other. Then strange things started happening. Expensive gifts began arriving anonymously for Ivy. First, a children's book collection worth hundreds of dollars, then a trust fund statement mailed with no return address. Then a scholarship account opened in Ivy's name containing nearly $40,000. Caleb thought it was a mistake. I thought someone was watching us. One night, while sorting mail, I noticed the envelope seal carried the symbol of a vineyard branch pressed in gold wax. Amelia had once sketched that same symbol on a napkin, while telling Caleb stories about the grandfather she hated. 2 weeks later, a black SUV parked outside my house. A woman in a navy coat stepped out carrying a leather folder. She introduced herself as Vivian Laurent, attorney for Charles Laurent, Amelia's grandfather. Caleb nearly slammed the door in her face. Vivian stopped him with one sentence. "Your daughter is the sole heir to the Laurent estate." The silence after that felt electric. Amelia's grandfather had been searching for her before she died. He discovered the accident too late. When investigators found Caleb raising Ivy alone after being disowned by his family, Charles Laurent hired people to quietly observe him for over 2 years. He wanted to know if Caleb truly loved Ivy, or if he would eventually abandon her. According to Vivian, the old man believed money revealed character. Caleb had passed every test without even knowing he was being tested. 3 months later, Charles Laurent arrived in town personally, 81 years old, sharp gray suit, cane carved from dark oak. The kind of presence that makes entire rooms go silent. He came to my house for dinner. My tiny kitchen suddenly contained a billionaire vineyard owner eating frozen lasagna while Ivy explained dinosaurs to him with applesauce on her face. At one point, Charles looked at Caleb and quietly asked, "Why did you stay?" Caleb answered without hesitation. "Because she's my daughter." The old man nodded once like that answer healed something ancient inside him. That should have been the end of it. It was, because news spreads fast in small towns, especially when money is involved. Suddenly the same relatives who ignored Caleb for years started appearing again. My aunt sent Christmas cards. Church friends asked about Ivy. My mother's friends began whispering that perhaps things had been misunderstood. Then came the phone call. My father wanted to meet Ivy. Not apologize, not admit fault, meet Ivy. I agreed to one condition. They would come to Ivy's 4th birthday party and face the truth publicly. No private dinners. No pretending the last 4 years never happened. My father reluctantly agreed. He thought he could control the narrative once he arrived. He had no idea what was waiting for him. The party was held in my backyard, under strings of cheap lights. Caleb and I hung ourselves. Ivy wore a yellow dress with sunflowers stitched across the pockets. Charles Laurent attended too, sitting quietly beneath the oak tree while kids smashed piñatas nearby. My parents arrived 20 minutes late carrying an enormous dollhouse wrapped in silver paper like money could erase memory. My mother froze the second she noticed Charles sitting beside Ivy. She recognized him instantly from charity galas and newspaper articles. Her entire face changed. Suddenly this was not that dead girl. This was the Laurent family. Wealthy, influential, respected. Acceptable. That was the moment I truly hated them, because I realized their cruelty had always depended on status. If Amelia had been rich in their eyes from the beginning, none of this would have happened. My father walked toward Charles with his politician's smile ready. Charles ignored the handshake completely. "You're the man who abandoned his son," he said calmly. Every conversation in the yard stopped. My father stammered something about misunderstandings and difficult times. Charles looked at Caleb instead. "Did you ever miss a single night with your daughter?" "No," Caleb answered. "Did you ever ask your sister to raise her alone?" "Never," Charles nodded. "Then I know exactly who the parent is here." My mother started crying immediately. She always cried when losing control. She reached for Ivy, calling herself Grandma for the first time in 4 years. Ivy looked confused and hid behind Caleb's leg. That tiny movement shattered my mother more than any insult could have. Children know who shows up. They always know. Then came the final twist nobody expected. Charles stood slowly, leaned on his cane, and announced that Ivy's inheritance would remain protected in trust until adulthood. But there was another condition attached to his estate. He had rewritten his will 3 weeks earlier. Upon his death, the majority control of the Laurent vineyards would pass to Caleb as Ivy's guardian and future advisor. Not lawyers, not board members. Caleb. The grieving boy my parents threw into the rain because they thought he was weak and worthless. My father's face drained of color. My mother nearly dropped the cake knife. Around us, people exchanged stunned looks. The church families who once whispered about Caleb were now staring at him like he had transformed into someone important overnight. But the truth was harder than that. Caleb had always been important. They were simply too shallow to notice until money forced them to. The party continued after that, strangely enough. Kids chased balloons. Music started again. Charles sat beside Ivy helping her unwrap presents while Caleb laughed for the first time in years without sadness hiding underneath it. My parents left early. My mother forgot the dollhouse beside the fence. Nobody stopped them. Later that night, after the guests were gone and the backyard was quiet, Caleb sat beside me on the porch steps holding Ivy asleep against his chest. He looked at me and said softly, "Do you think they regret it?" I watched my parents' taillights disappear down the street. "No," I answered honestly. "I think they regret being wrong." A year later, Caleb and Ivy moved to California to help manage the vineyard estate. The boy my parents called irresponsible now oversees hundreds of employees and spends weekends teaching Ivy how to plant grapevines. Charles passed away peacefully 6 months after their move. He left me a handwritten note thanking me for loving his granddaughter when others refused to. I keep it in my kitchen drawer, beside overdue bills and takeout menus, and all the ordinary pieces of life that mattered more than appearances ever will. My parents still send birthday cards. Caleb rarely answers them. Ivy knows who they are now, but she calls Vivian her grandmother and talks about Charles like a superhero with a cane. Sometimes that is the real consequence of cruelty. Not revenge, not screaming matches, just becoming irrelevant in the story of the people you failed to love.